Emily Harris gripped the steering wheel tightly as her car rolled to a stop in front of the lake house. The night was quiet, only the sound of crickets filling the air. She was tired after the long drive, her eyes heavy, but her heart lifted when she saw the house. This was supposed to be her safe place. A fresh start for her and her son Ethan. She stepped out of the car, stretching her stiff legs. Ethan was fast asleep in the back seat, his head leaning against the window. Emily reached for his small suitcase and carried it toward the gate, her breath visible in the cool night air. She imagined how happy Ethan would be in the morning, running down to the dock, laughing the way he hadn't since his father's death. Emily pulled out her key, slid it into the lock, and turned. Nothing. She frowned, tried again, and jiggled the handle. Still nothing. Her chest tightened. That's strange, she whispered to herself. She had been here many times. This was her house. Why wouldn't the key work? She knocked softly, not wanting to wake Ethan. At first there was no answer. Then lights flicked on inside, and shadows moved past the curtains. The door finally opened, and standing there was Margaret Harris, her mother-in-law. Her face was cold, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "Margaret," Emily said with a tired smile. "The key isn't working. Can you let me in?" Margaret's eyes narrowed. "We changed the locks." Emily blinked, confused. "What? Why? There's no room for you here," Margaret said flatly. Her voice carried no warmth, only sharp edges that cut through the night. Emily's breath caught. "No room? Margaret, this is my house. Daniel left it to me." Margaret didn't let her finish. "It's a family house. You don't belong here." Emily's hands trembled as she clutched Ethan's suitcase tighter. "But I came here for Ethan. For us. Please just let me in. We're exhausted." Behind Margaret, Emily caught a glimpse of Charles, her father-in-law, sitting comfortably in the living room. He didn't even look at her. The sight made her stomach twist. Her voice broke. "You can't just lock us out. This house is mine." Margaret raised her chin. "Not anymore." Then she stepped back and shut the door. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed in Emily's ears like a slap. She stood frozen on the porch, heart racing, face burning with shame. Across the street, a curtain moved. A neighbor was watching. Emily felt the weight of their eyes. Her cheeks grew hotter, tears pressing at the corners of her eyes. She wanted to scream, to pound on the door, but Ethan stirred in the car. She swallowed her anger, forcing herself to stay calm. How did this happen? She thought. Why were they treating her like a stranger, after all she had lost? Emily turned back toward the car, her legs weak. She opened the door and looked at her son, still asleep, his face peaceful. For his sake she bit her lip and kept silent. But inside, humiliation burned, mixing with fear. The lake house was supposed to be their safe place. Instead, it had become the scene of her rejection. Emily Harris had once believed her life was steady and secure. She married Daniel Harris when she was 25. Daniel was a successful architect, charming and kind, with a smile that made her feel safe. He loved designing houses that blended with nature, and he often talked about building a dream home by the water. Emily, a lawyer just beginning her career at the time, admired his passion and drive. Their marriage was not perfect, but it was full of love. Daniel worked long hours on his projects, and Emily did the same at her law firm, but they always found time for each other and for their son Ethan, who came into their lives a few years later. Emily still remembered how Daniel's face lit up the day Ethan was born. "Our little legacy," he had whispered, holding the baby gently in his arms. 6 months ago, that legacy shattered. Daniel died suddenly in a car accident on a rainy evening. One moment, Emily had been waiting for him to come home for dinner. The next, she was answering the phone to hear the police officer's voice. The pain was unlike anything she had ever felt, a wound that cut through every part of her life. In the middle of her grief, Emily had to face practical matters. Bills, funeral costs, legal documents. Daniel's sudden death left her with little more than memories and responsibilities. Most of his wealth and investments were tied up in the family's name, controlled by his parents, Margaret and Charles. The only thing Daniel had left directly to her, in her own name, was the lake house. It was small compared to their city apartment, but to Emily it was priceless. The lake house was more than just property. It was where Daniel had taken her on their first summer as a married couple. It was where Ethan had learned to swim, Every corner of it held laughter, warm evenings, and the smell of fresh pine. After Daniel's death, Emily clung to it as a symbol of hope. She dreamed of weekends there with Ethan. Away from the noise and judgment of others, she thought it would be their new beginning. But Margaret and Charles had never approved of her. From the first day she met them, Emily knew she didn't fit into their idea of family. Margaret came from old money, elegant and sharp-tongued. Charles, quiet but stern, often spoke of the Harris name with pride, as if it were a title. To them, Emily was too ordinary, too independent. A lawyer who worked long hours and didn't always put her husband first. That's how Margaret described her, often with a tight smile. During Daniel's life, their dislike had been hidden behind polite words and cold glances. But after his death, it came out sharper like knives. Margaret began making comments during family gatherings. If only Daniel had slowed down, maybe he'd still be with us. Some wives know how to take better care of their husbands. Emily would bite her tongue, holding back tears, for Ethan's sake. Charles would interfere in Ethan's schooling. He would call teachers without asking Emily, insisting Ethan needed proper guidance and shouldn't be raised only by his mother. They tried to control decisions about Ethan's future, questioning Emily at every step, as if she were incapable of raising her own son. Their words cut deep. "You don't belong in this family," Margaret once whispered when she thought no one was listening. "You were temporary. Daniel was ours. You were just passing through." Emily carried those words like stones in her chest. Every day at work, she forced herself to be strong. As a junior partner at her law firm, she handled demanding cases, often staying late at the office. She had to keep going for Ethan, for herself. But at night, when Ethan was asleep, the loneliness crept in. She missed Daniel's steady presence. She missed having someone to share the weight with. Still, Emily was determined. She had one clear goal: to protect her son's future. Ethan was only 8, but he had already lost too much. He had lost his father, and now he was caught in the tension between his mother and grandparents. Emily didn't want him to grow up feeling unwanted or torn. The lake house became her dream of stability. She pictured Ethan running down to the dock, fishing with her on quiet mornings, doing homework on the porch while she worked beside him. It was a place where they could heal together, free from Margaret's sharp words and Charles's stern disapproval. For Emily, the lake house was not just a building. It was her promise to Ethan, that no matter what, they would have a place to call their own. But as she stood at the locked gate that night, suitcase in hand, Emily realized her in-laws had gone further than she imagined. The house she thought would be her safe place was now in their control. Her dreams, her peace, and even her dignity were under attack. She was exhausted, but deep inside, a small fire began to burn. Emily would not let them take everything. Not this time. After being locked out, Emily's hands shook as she knocked again, louder this time. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Ethan stirred in the back seat of the car, but she prayed he wouldn't wake up to see this. The door opened again, and this time Charles stood beside Margaret. His face was calm, almost smug, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Why are you doing this?" Emily asked, her voice breaking. "This house is mine. Daniel left it to me. You know that." Charles let out a short laugh. "No, Emily. This house has always belonged to the Harris family. It was our retreat long before you came into the picture." Margaret's cold eyes narrowed. "Daniel wanted us to have this house. It was never meant for you. You should know that." Charles let out a short laugh. "No, Emily. This house has always belonged to the Harris family. It was our retreat long before you came into the picture." Margaret's cold eyes narrowed. "Daniel wanted us to have this house. It was never meant for you. You should know that." Emily stared at them in disbelief. "That's not true. I have the deed in my name. I've seen the paperwork. You can't just decide it's yours." But instead of answering, Margaret smirked. "Paperwork can be handled. You'll see." Her words hit Emily like ice water. "What do you mean by handled?" she asked, her throat tight. Charles stepped closer, lowering his voice as though speaking to a foolish child. "Do you really think we didn't plan for this? We made a copy of Daniel's keys months before he passed. We moved in after the funeral. This is our home now." Emily's mouth went dry. "You stole keys? You broke into my house." Margaret's lips curved into a thin smile. "We didn't break in. We belong here. You don't. You were only married to Daniel for a few years. We raised him. We built this family. You are just temporary." The word stabbed her heart. Temporary. That was how they saw her. Not as Daniel's wife, not as Ethan's mother, not as someone grieving the same loss they were. Just an outsider who had been allowed in for a while, but never accepted. Tears filled Emily's eyes. She wanted to argue, to shout, to tell them they were cruel and wrong. But she could feel the eyes of the neighbors on her. A light turned on across the street. Someone stood at their window watching. She felt stripped bare, humiliated. "Get some rest, Emily," Charles said with mock kindness. "You'll understand soon enough. You don't have a place here anymore." Then Margaret closed the door firmly, leaving Emily standing in the cold with Ethan's suitcase clutched in her hands. She turned back toward her car slowly, her legs heavy, her chest aching. She opened the door and glanced at Ethan. He was still asleep, his small face peaceful, unaware of the storm around him. For his sake, she bit her lip hard, holding back sobs. As she slid into the driver's seat, the weight of the night crushed her. She had been turned away from the one place that still felt connected to Daniel, the one place she thought she and Ethan could rebuild. Her in-laws had taken it from her, not with kindness or reason, but with arrogance and lies. She drove away from the lake house, tears spilling freely now. She felt humiliated, powerless, stripped of dignity. But as the road stretched out before her, another feeling began to rise beneath the pain. It started small, a spark deep inside her chest. Anger. Not just anger at Margaret and Charles, but at the way they treated her as if she didn't matter, as if Ethan didn't matter. They thought they could bully her into giving up, that she would simply walk away. Emily wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "No," she whispered into the dark car. "Not this time." She glanced at Ethan again. He needed her to fight. He needed stability, a home that was truly theirs. This was no longer about a house. It was about her son's future. It was about her own dignity. As the headlights cut through the night, Emily gripped the steering wheel tighter. She had been humiliated tonight, but she would not be broken. She would find a way to take back what was hers. The Harris family wanted her to be temporary. But Emily Harris was not going anywhere. Emily consulted her lawyer friend, Rachel, the very next morning. She sat across from her in Rachel's small but tidy office, clutching a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Her eyes were swollen from crying the night before, and her hands twisted nervously in her lap. "They changed the locks, Rachel," Emily whispered. "They said Daniel wanted them to have the house. They told me I don't belong there." Rachel leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowed. "Emily, listen to me. This is going to get ugly. Margaret and Charles are not just grieving parents. They're wealthy, manipulative, and very well connected. They'll fight you with everything they have." Emily swallowed hard. "But the house is legally mine. The deed is in my name." "That's true," Rachel agreed. "But they won't care about the law. They'll try to twist the story, make you look ungrateful, maybe even unfit. You have to be ready for a battle." Emily closed her eyes, exhaustion pressing down on her. "I just wanted a place for Ethan and me. I didn't want a war." Rachel's voice softened. "I know. But if you don't fight, they'll take everything. You can't let them bully you out of what's yours." With Rachel's help, Emily filed papers to reclaim the lake house. It felt like the first step forward, but it also opened the door to a storm. Within weeks, Margaret and Charles began their smear campaign. At church, where Emily had once felt supported, whispers followed her down the aisle. Women leaned into each other, muttering that she had abandoned Daniel in his final years, that she was only after money. At the grocery store, someone she barely knew avoided eye contact, embarrassed by the rumors. Margaret told anyone who would listen that Emily was planning to sell the lake house for cash. "She doesn't care about tradition," Margaret said sweetly, her words laced with poison. "She just cares about herself." The lies spread faster than Emily could fight them. Even some of her colleagues at the firm looked at her differently. She overheard one whisper, "She's suing her in-laws." Can you imagine? At home, the pain cut deeper. Ethan came home from visiting his grandparents one weekend with confusion in his eyes. "Mom," he said quietly as they sat at the kitchen table, "Grandma says you're tearing the family apart. She says maybe if we gave them the house, everyone would stop fighting. Wouldn't that be easier?" Emily's breath caught in her throat. She reached across the table, taking his small hand in hers. "Ethan, this isn't your fault. None of it. And the house is ours. Your dad wanted us to have it. But Grandma says you're wrong," Ethan whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "She says you don't care about family." Emily hugged him tightly, her heart breaking. After he went to bed, she sat alone in the dark, staring at the walls. Doubt clawed at her. Was she being selfish? Was she really tearing Ethan apart by holding on to the house? She remembered nights when Daniel had defended her against his parents. "Ignore them, Em," he used to say, wrapping his arms around her. "They'll never see anyone as good enough for me. But I chose you. You're my family." Now he was gone, and she faced them alone. Without his voice to shield her, their words cut deeper, sharper. Weeks passed and the court filings dragged on. Emily juggled her demanding job, late nights preparing legal documents, and mornings getting Ethan ready for school. She tried to stay strong at work, smiling for clients, but every night she collapsed into bed drained. Grief pressed down on her, heavier than ever, and the constant attacks from her in-laws chipped away at her spirit. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Margaret's. Emily hesitated before opening it, her stomach knotting. She unfolded the paper and read the words slowly, her chest tightening with each line. "You'll never be part of this family. Not in that house. Not anywhere." Emily sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in her hands. Tears blurred her vision. She could almost hear Margaret's voice, cold and final, pushing her out of Daniel's life once again. For a long moment, Emily felt hollow, like a shell of herself. The fight seemed endless, and she wondered if she had the strength to keep going. But then she looked toward Ethan's bedroom door. She thought of his small voice asking if they should just give up the house. "No," Emily whispered fiercely to herself. "This isn't just about the house. It's about Ethan's future. It's about showing him that we don't let people take what's ours." The letter lay on the table, cruel and sharp, but instead of crushing her, it lit the fire inside her once again. If Margaret wanted her gone, Emily would prove she belonged more than ever. She would not let them erase her, or her son, from Daniel's memory. The battle was far from over, but Emily knew she had to keep fighting. Not just for walls and land, but for dignity, for love, and for the family she and Daniel had built together. The in-laws presented forged letters on the day of the court hearing. Margaret held them up proudly, as if they were the final proof that Emily was lying all along. "These are Daniel's words," Margaret told the judge, her voice dripping with sorrow. "Our son wanted us to have the lake house. He said it belonged to his family, not to her. We are only carrying out his wishes." Emily sat frozen at the table beside Rachel, her lawyer and closest friend. She could hardly breathe as the judge examined the papers. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. She wanted to scream that it was a lie, but her voice felt trapped in her throat. Rachel whispered firmly, "Stay calm, Emily. Let me handle this." Margaret went on, her voice rising as she played the grieving mother. "She doesn't understand. She was never part of our family. Daniel knew this house was ours. These letters prove it." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her in-laws had sunk so low, dragging Daniel's memory into their lies. She covered her mouth with her hand, shaking her head, a wave of hopelessness crashing over her. What if the judge believed them? What if everything she had fought for was about to be taken away? She thought of Ethan, of the nights she had promised him they would have a place of their own. What if she had lied to her own son without meaning to? Her vision blurred. She felt herself breaking. For a moment, she wanted to give up, to let the house go just to end the pain. Then Rachel stood up, her voice clear and steady. "Your Honor, those so-called letters are not authentic. We have the real evidence." Before his accident, Daniel Harris updated his will. He made it very clear who should own the lake house. The courtroom grew quiet. Margaret and Charles stiffened, their smug expressions fading. The judge motioned for Rachel to continue. Rachel placed a folder on the desk and handed copies to the judge. "Here is Daniel Harris's last will and testament, signed and witnessed. It leaves the lake house explicitly to his wife, Emily Harris, and their son Ethan." Emily wiped her tears, hardly daring to believe. Rachel added gently, "And attached to that will was a handwritten note. Daniel wrote it himself." The judge picked up the note, adjusted his glasses, and read aloud. For Emily, a place of peace. For Ethan, a place to grow. The words filled the room, soft yet powerful. Emily gasped quietly, pressing her hand to her chest. She could see Daniel's handwriting in her mind, the familiar slant of his letters. It was his voice, reaching out to her from beyond, reminding her that she had never been alone. The judge looked over the papers again, then fixed his gaze on Margaret and Charles. His voice grew firm. This court finds that the lake house belongs to Emily Harris and her son Ethan. Furthermore, I am deeply troubled by the actions taken by the late Mr. Harris's parents, presenting forged letters, changing locks on a house you do not own, and attempting to intimidate the rightful heir. This is disgraceful. Margaret's face flushed red. Charles shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes on the ground. The judge's voice cut through the silence. You have not only tried to manipulate the law, but have also shown shocking disrespect for your son's wishes. Consider this your final warning. Any further interference will result in legal consequences. Emily sat frozen, her hands trembling, but this time not from fear. Relief flooded through her like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. She had won. Not just for herself, but for Ethan. Then, as if unable to control herself, Margaret stood up suddenly, her voice sharp, A1 full of rage. You stole him from us, Emily. You stole Daniel. And now you steal this house too. Gasps filled the courtroom. People turned to stare. Margaret's bitterness poured out, raw and ugly. He was ours, not yours. You never belonged in this family. The judge banged his gavel. Enough, Mrs. Harris. Sit down. But the damage was already done. Everyone had seen Margaret's true face. The whispers started around the room, not about Emily this time, but about the cruelty of the Harris parents. Emily lifted her chin, blinking back tears. For the first time in months, she felt Daniel's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. He had chosen her. He had trusted her. And now at last the truth was clear. Rachel leaned close and whispered, You did it, Emily. You didn't just fight for a house. You fought for your place. And you won. Emily nodded slowly, her heart steady again. This wasn't just about walls and land. It was about love, memory, and dignity. And at last she had them back. Emily and Ethan returned to the lake house on a bright Saturday morning. This time, the locks were brand new, and the deed was safely tucked away in her bag. She unlocked the door with steady hands, feeling a rush of relief as it clicked open. No one could shut her out now. The house was truly hers, protected by the law and by Daniel's own words. Inside, the room smelled faintly of pine and lake water, just as she remembered. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the windows. Emily placed her bag on the table and took a slow breath. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was proof of her strength. She had walked through grief, humiliation, and battles she never wanted, and she had come out standing. Ethan dropped his backpack at the door and ran straight toward the dock. Mom, come see, he shouted. His voice rang with excitement, brighter than she had heard in months. Emily followed him outside, her heart swelling as she watched him race across the wooden planks, arms wide like an airplane. He laughed loudly as he leaned over the edge, spotting fish darting beneath the surface. The sound made Emily's eyes sting with tears. It had been so long since Ethan had laughed like that, so free and unburdened. For the first time, she felt hope bloom inside her. Not fragile, but steady and real. Rachel arrived later that afternoon, carrying a bottle of sparkling water and 2 glasses. She hugged Emily tightly and looked around the house with a smile. It feels different now, doesn't it? Emily nodded. It feels like ours again. Like it should have always been. Rachel poured the drinks and handed her a glass. You didn't just fight for the house, Emily. You fought for your place in the story of this family. And you won. Daniel would be proud. Emily swallowed hard, touched by her friend's words. She knew Rachel was right. This wasn't only about walls and land. It was about proving she belonged, not because the Harris family allowed it, but because Daniel had chosen her, because she and Ethan were family on their own. As the sun dipped lower, Emily sat on the porch, watching Ethan chase fireflies across the grass. For the first time in months, the air around her felt light. She no longer felt the heavy weight of Margaret's disapproval, or Charles's cold silence. The court had spoken. The truth had been revealed. Still, she knew there was one more choice to make. Margaret and Charles had shown their true hearts, and they would never stop trying to hurt her if she let them close again. She thought about Ethan, about the confusion and pain in his eyes when he repeated his grandparents' cruel words. That wasn't the life she wanted for him. That night, after tucking Ethan into bed, Emily sat at the kitchen table with a pen and paper. She wrote a simple note to herself. Choose peace. Protect Ethan. No more toxic ties. She folded the paper and slipped it into her journal. It was her final decision. There would be no more visits, no more chances for Margaret and Charles to twist Ethan's heart. From now on, their life would be their own. Emily stood at the window, gazing out at the calm lake. The reflection of the moon rippled across the water, soft and peaceful. She wrapped her arms around herself and breathed deeply. The battle was over. She had survived the storm. Behind her, Ethan stirred and called sleepily, "Mom." "Yes, sweetheart. Can we stay here forever?" Emily smiled, her heart full. "As long as you want, Ethan. This is our home." Emily sat by the lake at sunset, her journal resting on her lap. The sky was painted in soft shades of gold and pink, the water shimmering as if it carried secrets. She wrote slowly, her pen scratching across the page. "This house is more than wood and stone. It is our new beginning. My fresh start. Ethan's safe place." She paused, staring out at the rippling water. The gentle waves carried her thoughts back to Daniel, to the promises they had once shared. Her throat tightened, and she whispered softly into the evening air. "I kept your promise, Daniel. I'll make sure Ethan always feels at home." The breeze rustled the trees, and for a moment, Emily felt as though he was there, listening, smiling, proud. Ethan's small footsteps crunched on the grass behind her. He came to sit beside her, leaning against her shoulder. Without saying a word, he slipped his little hand into hers. Emily squeezed it gently, her heart swelling. Together, they watched the water move, the ripples spreading but never breaking. It was calm, steady, like the life she hoped to build for them. For the first time in many months, Emily felt the weight lift from her chest. She wasn't just holding on to a house. She was holding on to her story, her dignity, her strength. Ethan looked up at her and smiled, and Emily smiled back through her tears. The grief would never fully leave, but it no longer defined her. What lay ahead was not broken, but beginning again. The lake reflected the fading light, and Emily closed her journal, her hand still holding her son's. She was ready, not just to live in the house but to live fully again. Hey loves, thanks for staying with me till the end. Don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and hit that subscribe button for more. See you next time.